Well, welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. I am so excited today to have Jason VanRuler. He's joining me on the podcast. Jason is a licensed therapist. He uses psychology, biblical wisdom, and clinical experience to help you find connection and healing. He's a coach, he's a therapist, he's a speaker. The book is Get Past Your Past, How Facing Your Broken Pieces Leads to True Connection. This is a great conversation, so let's go to the studio right now. Well, Jason, welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. Thanks for joining us. It's good to meet you and to have you here today. Thanks.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this a lot. So thanks so much for having me.
Well, I have too. And as we talked before, you've got a great story living in South Dakota, 3 kids, wife, married 17 years, a lot of good things there. So let's just kind of just jump right into this because I think there's, again, as a counselor that I hear sometimes from Christians, do Christians really need counseling? I mean, isn't the gospel enough for them? I'm not sure where all that came from. I think maybe belief systems or things people have said to people over the years. But how would you respond to someone who says that, I don't know if I really need counseling, but isn't God enough?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, first, that's a great question. And that is also something I've heard a fair amount myself. And so what I kind of come up with is, yes, the gospel is enough, for sure. Absolutely. And it helps to talk it out. And so I don't think it has to just be one or the other. I think it can be a both. And because I think some of us process verbally, and I think we also only know what we see and what we've experienced. And so probably everybody's had that experience of growing up and then meeting someone in adulthood and hearing they do something in a wildly different way, and having never thought about doing that until you met this new person. And so in my mind, counseling and therapy is kind of that experience of someone saying, hey, I know something about this you might not know, and I want to talk to you about that and work through it with you. Ideally, the person that you're talking to as a counselor or therapist is faith-oriented, and that's something that's important to them too. Right. Because when that happens, I think we just have this beautiful merger of both our faith and the clinical piece that is actually really, really helpful to people.
Oh, I think so too. I think there's just such a difference. There's a connection there. And I think people, once they see that, they realize that God really does use people to help his people, use Christians to help other Christians. I mean, Jesus was called a wonderful counselor. And so we're not Jesus, but that I think it shows there. I mean, there was a reason. Jesus was a great listener. Jesus had wisdom to help people, and all those kind of things that we try to do on our level will never be as good as he was. But I think that the model is there for us to do that. And I think that it just, I don't know either why people would look at it that way. Because I believe, like you do, God is enough, or our faith is enough. But he chooses, just like he does, you could read the Bible yourself, but there's Bible teachers. You could preach to yourself, but we've got awesome pastors and people who give us the message. And I think the same thing, you could read the Bible and certainly get all kinds of help. But I feel like you do, I think, called by God to help people navigate their lives, and with using God as our anchor, it's our roadmap, so to speak, that we get to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel in the same way called to it. And actually my prayer every day is just that God shows up and I get out of the way. That's actually just my prayer before every session is like, hey, make it not about me. Help me to get out of the way and show up and make it clear what needs to happen. And so I think when you find someone who's willing to work with you that has that type of orientation, really beautiful things start to happen, because they say, like, I just want to be in a space where we invite God to show up and help us to clear some of this out.
Yes, and I think when we do that, I totally agree completely with that. It's amazing when God does show up. When sometimes someone will work with them, and maybe later on they say, when you said this, and I'm thinking, I don't know what you were saying that. But I did, and it's probably nothing that I really would ever use, but you just know God does show up, and he does give us help and wisdom in those situations. And I'm like, I just got to get out of the way.
Yeah, because I think if we don't try to get out of the way, we're in the way, and then we make it about something it's not. And to your point, I've had that experience too, where I laughed as you said that, because I'm certain I said the most brilliant thing. I think back on a session and I say, oh man, when I said that was just amazing. And then I've actually asked clients, hey, what was the most powerful or most impactful thing about our time together today? And they say something else. They're like, well, actually, it was this. And I'm like, but I thought I said a brilliant thing. And they're like, no, that wasn't that at all. And a lot of times you're like, I don't even remember that thing that you thought was amazing. What was impactful was this. And so that's where I just kind of go, like, my own agenda isn't very helpful. I just need to be here and create space and move to the side.
Absolutely. And just like God show up and work through us, which is awesome. It's really fun. So let's kind of talk about people. How can you see people don't realize that they're dealing with their past? Obviously, our family of origin, what we experience, all of, I think, makes us who we are today. So how can you see people that don't realize that?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it because I know it's not popular, but almost always. I don't know what your experience is, but almost always. And the thing is that what we learn through our past and our childhood experiences are just a way of being and a pattern of behavior and habits and relationship types. And so as much as we may love or hate that experience that we have, it's what we know. And so again, we're more likely to replicate it than not. And so when people come in and they say, I'm stuck over and over again, a lot of times it's because they've had experiences they don't want to replicate, but they don't know how to do it differently. And so they find themselves just acting out that pattern.
Yeah, just kind of stay in it. Well, I think that, I think I heard someone say years ago that, that is the home we grew up in is our textbook for male, female, husband, wife, mother, father, all those kind of things, whether we like it or not. And then I think we have to realize we get to a certain point, okay, what did I do with that? It was that, how do I take the good things forward and leave the bad things or things that were harmful or not good behind? How do you help people do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I know from my own experience, I didn't want to replicate a lot of my childhood. And so I did what I think a lot of people do, which is just to declare that you're going to do it differently. As an 18-year-old, I think I shouted from the rooftops, like, I'll be different. You'll see. Just wait. Right. And then I just, never asked for help and didn't read a book. And so a couple of years later was like, oh, man, it's the exact same as what I left because I just only knew what to do, what I knew how to do.
Sure.
And so I think what I try to invite people to do is to better understand what did I actually learn from my experiences, like true or not true, what did I take away from that? And then does it need to be updated? Because we may have learned, if we had, a volatile childhood or our parents were neglectful, we may say, well, what I learned is you can't trust people. And that may have been wildly true as a child, but is it still true today? And so I spend a lot of time with people taking those messages and updating them to today and changing how they view that relationship with the past.
Yeah, it's like they almost make that an absolute because of what they experienced, but it doesn't. You gotta learn to trust people somewhere. There's got to be somewhere out there that you can trust. But I think it's hard that when the people that God puts in your life to take care of you and raise you and be good to you, and you can't trust them, that's a huge deal.
Yeah, because our survival literally rests on that. And so if these people who are supposed to care for us and feed us and provide shelter, if we can't, for whatever reason, doesn't make them bad people, but if we can't trust them, it's hard to say that doesn't affect their life, right? Because we walk away from that experience saying the people I'm supposed to trust most, I can't. And so then how do I willingly put myself back in a situation where I have to trust someone again?
Yeah, and that can be hard work for someone to do that, right?
Yeah, that's not easy because of how it feels, right? And so oftentimes I'll talk with someone and I'll just say like, yeah, that's how it feels. It might not be how it is, but it's how it feels, right? And they'll say, well, how it feels, Jason, is it's life or death. And I'll say like, yep, I understand that because that's a saved feeling that you've had because you've experienced it before. But how is it really today as an adult? Well, it's different, right? Factually speaking, it's different, but it feels the same.
Yeah, and I think helping them see that they can do things different as an adult now. They don't have to replicate those things. You prior to me content, I've even said it, I'm doing something just like my mom or dad did. And sometimes it's good, and sometimes I wasn't going to do that, But again, it goes back to those are textbook.
Yeah, and then it's what we've known, and so it comes easy to us, even if it's not the right thing. It's just where we're kind of comfortable because it's what we've experienced. And so I think it's okay to recognize that. And it's okay to say you might want it different and practice acceptance about what did happen. But then we need to be really intentional about what we're trying to do, especially if it's different.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. So if a couple is in a pretty good marriage could their past be showing up in ways they're not aware of? What would that look like?
Well, I don't know about you, but I see a lot of these where if someone grew up in a childhood, for instance, where maybe their parents never spoke about anything, they just didn't have difficult conversations, they can replicate that pattern easily because they don't know how to talk about things. And so they can have a quote unquote good marriage, but that good marriage is contingent on the fact that they never talk about anything. I've also seen people go the other way, where maybe they came from a childhood where their parents fought a lot and it was big and it was explosive. And so they begin to feel like that's just how you do things. And so one partner will say, well, yeah, of course I yelled, or of course I said something mean, but like, that's just what you do. And the other person goes, well, this is super destructive. That really hurt my feelings because they grew up differently. So a lot of times where there's a disconnect in relationships, it's often a disconnect in the system that we witnessed growing up and what we're trying to make happen today. And so we need to get on the same page about a relationship system.
Sure. Somebody's normal of a shouting family from someone that didn't grow up that way can be pretty scary.
It is. It throws you off. I mean, I remember, being just a Midwest guy. I went to New York for the first time for some training, and I met some great friends there. But boy, they talked differently than I did. And they said some stuff with a tone that felt very insulting and it felt very personally offensive. And they never thought about it that way. It's just how they talked. And so,
for that.
Yeah. And so it took me kind of saying like, hey, here's how this lands with me, and having a conversation for us to actually get connected because we spoke differently. And I think we do a version of that in our marriage.
Oh, I think so. It reminds me of a couple I worked with, and she had grown up in a very calm home, and and he had grown up in a home and things were quiet, something's getting ready to explode. It's like, this is the calm before the storm. And so, things would be quiet. She's doing great. And he's thinking, oh boy, here it comes, and then, so they had to communicate and talk about those things because you don't really realize that. Most of us don't realize those things when we're dating anyway. I think it's when you get married and you're living together, because you're not in a situation where those things come out before marriage.
Yeah, and you're not doing everything to make it work, right? So, I mean, I think we get a little comfortable, and when we get comfortable, the old ways come back to the surface. And so those start to kind of seep out for better or for worse. Sometimes that's a great thing, but we get comfortable and those become apparent, and then we start to actually have the marriage we're going to have.
Yeah. So what would you say if someone comes in and that kind of is their problem? You see that, oh my gosh, the past is showing up, and that's why you're having all these problems. So who do you say to?
Yeah, I just say, first and foremost, I see you. I relate. Me too. I get it. And then what do we want to do about that? So let's kind of get to the heart of like, what are the things that are coming up and what are those messages and how do we need to update those? And a lot of times they might be messages like, I'm unlovable, or I'm not worthy, or I can't trust people. And so we have conversations about, is that actually accurate? And is that something we want to live by? If we're going to kind of have these mottos, like, is that one of the ones that we want to hang on the wall in the kitchen above the door that we're going to believe in? Or do we need to update that? And as we work together, we start to update some of these things, and the world gets a little bigger and people start to see things differently.
Yeah, that's really good, because I think it's sometimes we just don't realize that we're right. It's it's believing a lie, but it's certainly not believing the truth, and so you get stuck in what you believe here instead of giving yourself the chance to redefine that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What the people in your life now, the people that you didn't want life with, and so we got a tendency, I guess, to take those labels from something in the past and then put it on somebody that we're in a relationship with the present.
Yeah, we project those, and it only makes sense that we would do that. But what's so fascinating is every time that a client does that or says a very negative message about themselves, I'll ask, is that the message you think God gave you? Is that a God-given message to you about your life? And almost always they're like, well, I'm sure it's not. I'm sure that's not how it is. Okay, well, what would be more accurate then? And when we start to live in that place, we have more peace and understanding.
That's a really good thing to when we really can see, well, especially if we've got a good relationship with the Lord, or we're pursuing that and really learning to see ourselves through His eyes. That makes a big difference. I think it helps us to get rid of a lot of those things that we have believed about ourselves that just hold us down in so many ways.
Yeah, they're a distraction from the life we're called to. And so one of my great joys is just working with people to eliminate distractions so they can focus on the truth and live the life they're called to.
We all have them, don't we? Those distractions.
I don't have any. I don't know about you. I have none.
I know.
I have mastered all of this. Yeah. And just about the time that we think we're getting rid of all of them, we put a few more in the way. It just seems to be our nature, is we like a challenge. And so there's no shortage of work to be done.
Well, I'm a lot older than you, and I can tell you haven't got these. It's not like
I'm looking for you to give me hope. Okay, so I still have to do the work. Okay, bummer.
Maybe I recognize them quicker now. I think that might be the one plus, and not let them go on, or not let them damage relationships like I did at one point. Just hold on to those things, just like, I don't know, they're sacred when they're so far from being sacred. And then you see them damage relationships, and you think, okay, I can't keep doing this. I may still have things come up. I got to handle this different.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, we just get in a better habit, which is that kind of maintenance thing. It's like, if you don't brush your teeth for a month, boy, you got a lot of work to do, right? But if you brush your teeth every day, you're fine, right? Like, that's the maintenance. Yeah. And so I think mental health and talking about issues like this in our marriage, like, that's the thing, is it's like the daily brushing. And if you don't do that and you get out of that, it's going to take a lot of momentum to get back there.
How do you get a couple to realize how important it is that they talk about things like this? Like, they talk about the past. They talk about things that could be affecting their marriage today. How do you get them started?
Yeah, the thing is, that's kind of a tough sell because if you don't have a lot of communication, that's hard to try to talk somebody into it. I think the thing that I usually approach is, how connected do we feel and how connected do we want to feel?
Like that.
Because if we want to feel connected, we're not feeling connected. A lot of times that emotional intimacy and depth is the missing link. And so oftentimes that's kind of where I'll start with, I get that you might not be as connected as you want, but let me show you how to do that better. And how we do that better is we start to talk about what's inside and not just what we project. And when we get vulnerable and get honest, it attracts intimacy from our partner, and we have a different relationship.
Yeah, that's awesome. So in the book, Get Past Your Past, you share the story of getting into a big fight with your wife, with Jody, and at a marriage conference, which is so much like the enemy just shows up and does stuff like that. But how it led you to take a chance in opening, kind of tell that story.
Yeah, well, that was not on my agenda. I'm a big to-do list guy, and fighting with my wife was definitely not on my to-do list that day. I was really, if I'm being honest, I just wanted to show up and kind of just be an impressive person to everyone that had it all together. Like, that was my real hope for the day. But we attended a session, and there was a break, and on the break, we just kind of did like all our greatest hits. And what I mean by that is, like, the things you fight about that you always fight about. Right? It was sort of like, I've got this bag full of things we can't resolve, and let me open that up. And so we did that. And then kind of got to a point where we had to go back to an event. And so it was like, well, now let's just pretend that didn't happen. Even though we're fighting and things are miserable right now, let's just pretend it didn't happen. And so we left, and we were walking back to the event, and actually ran into one of the facilitators and somebody I just looked up to a lot, still do, really admire. And they said, "How are you doing?" And they like actually meant it. You can tell when someone really means it.
Yes. Right.
And I felt like, I'd love to say like this was this big intentional thing, but I felt like for whatever reason, the Lord just put on my heart to tell the truth. And the truth was messy, right? The truth was, I think I'm supposed to be showing off, and we're falling apart. And in that moment, when I was vulnerable, like, we actually ended up having some connection, and we actually had a conversation that we needed to have for a long time. And there was vulnerability. But in that moment for me, I had to surrender and say, I'm not doing well. I don't know. Like, I don't have the answer. I don't have it figured out, and I need help. And that changed everything for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that scenario, what you must have felt safe with this person that you shared to. You sense that this person really cared, because that's pretty vulnerable. You're going back into an event, and somebody asks how you're doing, and you lay all this out. And so how did the person respond?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, no pressure, right? I'm just putting my vulnerability out there. So it's like, hey, no pressure. Show. You know what? They actually just listened. I don't know that they said anything that was really brilliant, or like earth shattering. And I mean that in a good way. Like they just were kind and offered wisdom, and listened. And I think, that to me was really hopeful, because I think even like we were talking about in this conversation, sometimes as a therapist, we feel like we got to show up in a major way or say something profound. And we overlook the fact that we just need to show up. And so what was beautiful in that moment is they just showed up without judgment and just said like, okay, yeah, like let's talk about it. And that changed everything for me. That was the beautiful part, is giving me space to show up.
Absolutely. And I think, I see this, and I don't know how many people over the years have said to me, nobody ever listened to me before. And it's a real gift I think we can give people, not only as counselors, but just as friends or companions or spouses, that there is a lot to be said. You don't have to hold the answers all the time. But just being there for someone like that person was for you, and listen to you, and probably, said a few things, but that allowed you to open up in a way that was so needed that you might not have done that with someone else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Back in that building, and it didn't happen like that. So
I definitely thought about that. I thought, oh man, I should just not say anything. But I think sometimes we need to hear ourselves speak in front of other people to hear what's really going on in our head. And so when we give people that space, I don't know about for you, but when we just sit and listen, which, that is hard to do sometimes, when we just show up and listen, sometimes people just say the thing and then they go, oh man, I get it now. I just heard what I said. I get it now. And that's all we have to do. It's like kind of a cool job, because they're like, thanks so much, Jason. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. But it does change things when we hear ourselves speak.
Yeah. What makes it so difficult for us as guys to be that vulnerable?
Yeah, I just think we're not taught to do that. That we I think at worst associate that with weakness. And at best, we are just told not to do it. And so when we have that training kind of our whole life just not to go there, we get really good at not going there. And we build a life of people around us that support us not going there. And so then what happens is that we end up in a marriage where we have a partner who's emotionally mature and they're insightful, and they say like, okay, well, now I demand this. And we go, well, you demand what? Right. And they say, well, I demand the thing that you've been told never to do. And I think as men, then we show up and we're kind of woefully unprepared for how to have those conversations. But the truth is the marriage we want, the relationship we want, is always on the other side of vulnerability. We just don't often know how to get there.
Yeah, I remember the first time I was really vulnerable with Nancy, and it was pretty early in the marriage, but it was during prayer, and I don't know, I didn't really mean to say what I said. It came out. And I remember thinking, how's she going to take that? Is she going to think, oh my gosh, I married some guy or whatever? And her response made it just set the groundwork for me to be able to continue to do that. She cared, she empathized, she was there. And I think as guys, we just have to be willing to take that risk. And certainly you want to be in a relationship with someone that loves you very much to do that. But I think our wives love it when we can be vulnerable.
They do.
So much better than we do.
Yeah, they're masterful at it. And so I think we do this thing where then we make it really complicated, because being vulnerable is really just kind of telling the truth about ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it's not this complicated thing, but I think when we do it as men, we feel like we have to somehow assert our manhood, so like if I'm going to tell you something vulnerable, I have to talk like this, or I have to flex while I'm doing it, just to kind of show like I'm still tough and I'm still manly. And I just wish it weren't that complicated, because I think even just biblically, like we're just shown all these examples of like showing up and being vulnerable and the most beautiful things happening and relationships changing. And I think that's true in our marriage too.
Yeah. And if it takes lifting weights to be vulnerable the first time with your wife, go ahead and do it, right?
You can do it. Go to the gym, bench press, tell them something vulnerable. You can combine those two.
Exactly. Hopefully that leads to you don't have to go to the gym. But no, I think there's so much truth in that, and our culture certainly has molded us in that way. And I think especially the home goes back to the same with origin. If you had a home where my dad was very good about letting me share and stuff like that, I think it helped a lot. I've worked with people, that, to cry as a guy was just like, that was probably the worst thing you could do. And when they finally get in a situation, they allow themselves to do something like that or talk about something that's painful. And there's so much healing that comes with that, so much cleansing. It's like that something was just lifted off of us. And we're just encouraging guys to take that risk.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you and I get to be permission givers to people. Yeah. We get to just say, like, I give you permission to say the thing. I give you permission to feel the feeling because it's there, right? I think sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking it's not actually there. Hey, it's there, and by the way, everyone that loves you can see it's there. They just are waiting for you to feel it. They're just waiting for you to say it. Because there's so many times I talk with someone and they go, well, vulnerably speaking, like I feel this way or I think this. But I think if I tell my spouse, they'll just be so shocked they won't know what to do. And if I had a nickel for every time they come back and they go, okay, well, I told her. And I say, okay, great. What happened? They go, well, she said she already knew. She was just waiting for me to say something. It's like, yeah, we're not as good actors as we think. Like what we think we protect is often obvious to the people who love us.
Absolutely. And God knows anyway. I mean, we definitely know we don't hide anything from God. It's like,
absolutely.
Say it. I don't want God to know. He knows it already.
Yeah.
And he hasn't zapped you because he knows it.
Right. Not yet, at least.
Not yet. Right. So let's talk about how that temptation where we try to run from brokenness, how does that play out in our daily life? And then also let's talk about how that plays out in marriage relationship.
Well, we just create a lot more problems for ourselves. I mean, the running makes sense. I get why we try to do it. And if we have experiences that tell us things don't get resolved ever, it seems easier to run. But the problem is then we're literally abandoning ourselves and others by running. And then we also open ourselves up to coping. And coping is usually not a healthy thing for us. So we open ourselves up to things like overworking or addiction or drinking too much or all these problems to deal with not dealing with the problems. And so it just kind of is taking like an already complicated, unfair thing and then stacking new problems on it. And when we do that, it just creates this huge system where we have to cope with it. We can't face it. We have to cope with it. And so we end up feeling really disconnected from people.
Sure. Absolutely. And so then what about in marriage?
Yeah, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. Yeah, you probably see this too. People don't come to me usually to tell me how good it is. I wish they did. Like that'd be kind of a cool session to have. But usually they come to me when they've avoided things for so long that they're no longer able to avoid them. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, we can deal with it today in a small way, or we can deal with it years from now in a big way when we might not be able to fix it.
Absolutely. Or the people around us that we kind of push them away.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys, that's so sad when that happens, but whenever it happens, I think we have to at some point face our brokenness.
Yeah.
And know that we all have that in some way. So certainly some are more difficult than others. I get that. I've worked with some people that I just don't cry when I find out they went through as a child. I don't think it's like that. But there's something there we all need that gets in the way of us being who God created us to be. And I think God wants, if we allow him in, he's going to help surface those things. And my feeling is anytime he surfaces something, he's got a match for us. He didn't surface the sun. Go, see ya. He's there.
He doesn't go, well, I'll just leave you with that. Here you go. Yeah. Take care.
Now, you didn't know this. Now you know it. Bye. Yeah, but I think we do have to run from it. And I think you're right. There's so many things that we run to that are so unhealthy for us that cause problems. If you run, to the guy that kids would end up being a gambler, and he literally gambled his whole everything away, including his name, before he was willing to deal with things. And it was just that addiction was where he ran. It was so destructive for him. And if he would have dealt with the issue that was there, but say, but sometimes we devil, sometimes we just.
Well, I think we're so adaptable that sometimes we just adapt even before we realize we shouldn't have. I always think back to one of the jobs I had. There was a desk area, kind of a central desk that I would sit at. And they one day delivered this whole pile of boxes right next to the desk. And I didn't know where to put them. I was like, I don't know what to do with those boxes. And so I just left them there. But when you know it, before too long, a couple of weeks had passed and I just adapted to the boxes being there. So I was like, well, you kind of have to suck in your stomach when you walk by this and you have to turn this way and lift your leg over here. And so I had just very, very quickly gotten used to the fact the boxes were there because I didn't know where to put them. And then I had my manager from out of town visit and they just looked at me and they just said, Jason, what are you doing? And the funniest thing is before they said that, I had stopped even thinking about it. I had just gotten used to having less space and having complicated ways to get to my office because I adapted. And I think that's what we do if we don't deal with our stuff, is we just get used to all these boxes sitting around us and we have to do this and do that. But it keeps us away from the truth and it disconnects us from people.
Absolutely. That is such a great visual example. I can just see that. I can see myself doing the same thing.
It's just like, well, yeah, you got to lift this leg and lift that leg. And I'm sure my boss was like, what is this guy doing over here?
That's so funny. So what are some steps, I guess, to start taking responsibility for that task and working through it? Somebody's listening today and they're thinking, okay, it's time. What do they do?
Well, first, I just would say I love that. I'm proud of anybody that's willing to kind of take a look at it because that takes courage. And so if you're in that space, I think, great, that's a first step. Really, the thing we want to do is just get honest about what's going on. So where is it not working as you see it? I think sometimes working with people, one of the biggest struggles they have is a refusal to just be honest with where they're at. Maybe that honesty looks like my marriage is really in a tough spot. Or maybe that honesty is saying, I've got an addiction or I've got a struggle that I can't work through on my own. But I think getting honest and telling someone that truth is where we get started. And if you're a faith person, there's an even easier way to do it, which is I think you just in prayer, you sit down and you go to God and you just say, like, God, here's where I'm at and here's what's going on. And I need to get honest with you so I can do the next thing.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good first step because I don't know why like I said earlier, why we think we hide things from God because he does. But I think with God, we're able to verbalize those things and get some things out. I think we can sense his presence in that, and that helps us take whatever next step he leads us to.
Yeah, and it doesn't always feel great. It's not always comfortable, but I look at it as if we practice that with God, we're always going to be supported. So the good news there is we're not going to be let down by that. Right. People, not everyone's going to be able to help us. So the people might be different, but God will be there. But we have to kind of show where we really are at and be honest about that if we actually want to get help. So from there, then we want to find people who can help us actually deal with those things and then get started going that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So much we say a counselor that can really walk through this with you and that will be with you through the whole thing.
Yeah.
To guide you. So somebody's listening today and they want to approach their spouse with this, but they're uncomfortable taking that step. It's just like, well, I can see some things here. I can see some things in my spouse. Or I see things in both of us. I really think we need to take that step. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think what I would probably encourage you to do is, and I don't know what you've learned through working with couples, but something I've learned is like in a relationship, we tend to do our best work when somebody role models how they want the other person to act, right? And so if you're looking for them to take responsibility for something, maybe you first, right? So maybe you say, hey, this is how I notice my past coming up. This is how I notice I kind of keep doing the same thing. And I wonder about that. I want to do some work around that. When we are willing to kind of take the lead and say, like, I'm willing to do this, oftentimes the other person's a lot more willing to engage in that conversation as opposed to saying, you should do this. Or I've been thinking a lot. I heard this podcast today. And here's the thing. I heard this guy, Jason VanRuler, and he just made me think about all the problems you have. Boy, that does not land well.
That's because maybe it'd be after you too.
Yeah, that's I'm getting a call later for an appointment. So that is not going to land well. So I think what I often will tell couples is like, if you want to encourage or invite your person to do some work, like you first. Like demonstrate what that looks like and invite them to the conversation.
Yeah, I've just bumped up against a lot, it seems, the last couple of years of how difficult it is for a lot of us in our culture to take responsibility. And I think what you're saying there is that it's taking the responsibility for yourself, and especially in a marriage relationship. I say go first and say, okay, I'm going to get healthy no matter what. And hopefully they will come along with you or they'll support you. I mean, maybe you're the only unhealthy one in it. That didn't seem to happen very much. These people are both a little bit unhealthy. But yeah, I think so. It doesn't do any good to point the finger at someone else. If you don't point, well, I don't think it's ever good to point the finger at somebody else, and your spouse especially.
Well, it just doesn't work. I'm all for it. It just doesn't work. It's just, I just like to do what works, and I just keep seeing that not working. And so, like, to your point, I love that. You invite them along and you hope for the best, but you do the work anyway.
Yeah. So if you're wanting to take that first step, just listen to what Jason's saying. Just take that step. And I don't think you'll ever regret it, do you?
No. I mean, I hear, people doing this work. I mean, it changes their life, and sometimes there's discomfort with that. So I always want to be honest about that is, it doesn't always lead you to be super happy and comfortable immediately all the time. Like, that's not really the purpose. The purpose is that through doing this work, we're better and we're closer to where we're called to be. And so I can't really think of anybody that I've ever worked with that said, Jason, I want a refund. Turns out, right, I wish I hadn't done any of this. That's just never something I've heard. I'm open to it, but I've never heard it yet.
Now, if I usually hear, I wish I would have done this a year ago or 5 years or 10 years ago. And I do too, but they didn't. So if you haven't, it's never too late, right? I mean, you can start it today. You can take that step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing worse than making a mistake is being too proud to admit it and doubling down. And so if you made one already, okay, hey, that's fair. You realize it. That's growth in and of itself. But like, don't double down. Just say like, yeah, I wish I would have done it sooner and I didn't, but here I am today.
Yeah, I think as long as we take that approach as a Christian, nothing's really a failure because we've learned and let God grow us through it. And so, you don't have to live in shame or those kind of things.
Yeah, you just go, hey, when I realized I wasn't supposed to be doing that, or I shouldn't have, or this is the wrong thing, I did something about it. And that's like the best we can hope for, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk just a little bit about the book. Get your past, how facing your broken places leads to true connection. People that have hurt you today, when they get the book, what can they expect?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, as a therapist working with a ton of different people in my career, it's been great. Gotten to work with people coming out of prison all the way up to celebrities and performers and everybody in between. And so what I wanted to do was just to write a book for somebody who had, as I kind of sold it to the publisher, someone that had $20 and a bit of hope. And the goal there was that I wanted to give people a very practical on-ramp to dealing with some of this stuff, whether they were in a place where they could easily afford therapy or they couldn't. Because if you've ever been stuck, and I know I've been stuck, the last thing I wanted was a bunch of theory and philosophy. I mean, I'm intrigued and interested by it, but it just didn't really help me. And so I wanted to write a book that says like, hey, if you're stuck in some of these things or these behaviors or types of relationships, I'm going to literally walk you through some steps to take to make it better today.
That's awesome. Great place to start and see where we're going to take what's that. Last question. What are you loving about your marriage in this stage of life that you guys are in?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we're probably more connected than we've ever been, quite honestly. I mean, I think we had, our kids are getting to an age where, I've got a 13 and a 10 and an 8. And so we're just able to like, the house can be clean for like 2 days in a row now. So we've got that, and people like have a bedtime and they go to bed then. And so I think we're just at this place where like our marriage is a little more in focus than it's been in years past. And I'm just loving that season. I'm just loving kind of connecting with Jody and having some time together that we maybe didn't. And so it's been really fun.
That's cool. Yeah, your kids are really getting at some really cool ages, and I know you guys enjoy them. But I think it does. You kind of realize I don't have to do all the things that I used to do. And you've got your oldest one can, maybe hold the fort down every once in a while.
Yeah, he watches the kids all the time. We don't even parent anymore. We just say, let us know how it's going, send us an update. But no, I mean, it's really the thing changes. And so I think it's great. Like I can talk about books with my kids now. And so we're just in this kind of fun season where I feel I'm pretty equipped to show up. And me being a therapist actually is helpful in this season, where there's been other seasons where it wasn't that helpful. And so it's just kind of been fun.
That's great. That's awesome. Jason, this has been a great conversation. The book is Get Past Your Past. I encourage people to pick it up. There's so much good in it. And just thanks for spending time today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet.